I see that it's 5:30. Time to be cooking dinner. This is the next installment of the series that Grit City Co-op is presenting on cooking. This potato presentation is going to be typical, I hope, of a decision that has been advanced, if not really settled on, by the board of Grit City Co-op to run on what you might think of as two tracks. We're going to be starting with dishes that are inexpensive and very easy to make. And that's what my focus will be now. And that's something that the co-op wants to provide for people for whom that's the best choice. But there are other members of the co-op who are interested in two things that we want to provide for. One is a little more healthy dishes and preparation, and the other is food that's grown locally. Now, those things both tend to create a little bit higher price, and I'll talk about that. But let's start with these potatoes that we have here. Now, the potatoes that we're going to be cooking tonight are ones that I've been given by a member of the Puyallup tribe. Well, I'm misspeaking. She's actually not a member of the Puyallup tribe. She's a member of the Quinault tribe, but she has access to benefits that the Puyallup tribe provides to its members. And one of the things that they've been doing in the last couple of weeks is actually giving away potatoes and onions. And the potatoes that we're going to be cooking are potatoes that they're giving away. Now, I have a pretty good idea of why they're giving potatoes away. These potatoes are russet potatoes. Here's an example. This one actually I bought at Safeway in order to really demonstrate some features of these potatoes. And notice it's very large. Potatoes that are grown in Washington State are primarily sold for the fast food business. They make French fries out of them. You can see what an advantage in making French fries having a large potato like this is. Well, one of my aims today is to help see how people can make use of these potatoes that they may have been given or bought at a very low price. I speak of a low price. In fact, again at Safeway, I checked out, and they were not giving away russet potatoes, but they were selling 10-pound bags of russet potatoes for $3.39 a piece. That's 34 cents a pound. There's almost nothing that you can buy for that little money. But again, the question is, what are you going to do with them? What we're going to do with these potatoes is actually twofold. We're going to peel them, and I want to emphasize that we're going to peel them. And one of the reasons that we're going to peel them is potatoes like this that are grown in eastern Washington are grown in an area where the weather is quite warm, certainly by comparison to traditional potato growing countries like eastern Idaho and Maine. In those countries, in those areas of potato production, it freezes in early October. And that's great for the potato growers because the vines in the potatoes die off because of the freeze, and then they can be removed pretty easily in order to have the potato diggers come through and dig the potatoes out of the ground. Now, again, one of the reasons they grow such large potatoes in eastern Washington is because the weather is warm and the growing season is much longer, and so they can get a longer time for the potatoes to grow and they can get bigger. But the downside of that is that the vines don't die from a freeze. And so in order to kill the vines so that they're out of the way for the digger to come through, they use an herbicide, or actually a combination of herbicides. To use a little more direct word for that, they use a poison to poison the vines. And of course that poison goes into the soil and the potato itself is contaminated by that poison. And for that reason, if I am ever buying potatoes from a market like Safeway that are not pesticide free, I never eat the peelings. I always peel the potatoes. Now, one of the problems with that is it takes time to peel the potatoes, and we're not going to keep you watching for the whole time I'm peeling them because that'll be a bit of time, though one of the reasons I wanted to have a clock here is so that you can have a sense of how much time it takes. So I'm beginning now to wash these potatoes. You see I'm using a vegetable brush, and I'm washing the potatoes. Many of you are quite familiar with doing this, but I want you to see all the steps. And so I'm just using a brush to scrub the potatoes, but I'm not going to be too careful about it because I'm actually going to take the peeling off the potato, and so we don't need to worry that it's too clean before we start peeling it. So watch the clock and you can tell how long it's going to take. I'm going to peel, I think, these 4 potatoes. They're fairly large. I'm not going to peel that great big one. I'll peel these 4 that I have, save the big one for putting in my compost, and when I'm finished peeling them, we'll come back and talk some more. Okay, we're back. You can see in the sink a lot of potato peelings here. Potato peelings make wonderful soup, but I'm not going to use them because, as I said, they're covered with residue from the poison. I want to emphasize another thing that I haven't done with all of the potatoes yet, and that's how to deal with bad spots, which you may find on the potato. We're going to cut those bad spots off. But even more important, and something you'll find with every potato, is that there are eyes in them. You can see the eyes where the peeler didn't go quite that deep. And you always want to cut those eyes out. Now the reason that you want to do that is because the eyes are where a new sprout grows. And there's actually a compound in the sprout that's not good for you. People used to think potatoes were poisonous. Well, green potatoes are, and the eyes are not good for you either, but they're easy enough to cut out. Now, speaking of sprouts, here's another thing to watch out for or to be aware of about potatoes that you buy that were grown in eastern Washington typically, and that is that sprouting is not good for preserving the potatoes. These are, I guarantee you, last fall's potatoes. They couldn't have harvested potatoes even by now, let alone a couple of months ago when they started the giveaway. They've been in storage all that time and they haven't been sprouting, and the reason they haven't been sprouting is mostly because they're treated with another chemical that keeps them from sprouting. And you don't want to eat that either. So those are all reasons for peeling the potato. Now this one's pretty clean now, and so I'm going to cut it. I'll show you our pot here. We have all the potatoes that I've peeled, and they're cut into chunks that are about twice as big as this potato. So I'll cut it in half. Then I have one more small one here that's got a bad spot, so I'm cutting that bad spot off and cutting the eyes out, and then we're going to be ready to go. Now this process is somewhat time consuming, but that's why we have a clock, is so that you can see really how long it's taken us. The old cartoons used to always show G.I. Joe peeling potatoes, and I think that was supposed to be emblematic of how tedious a chore peeling potatoes was. You didn't want to be on KP, but it's not really that bad. It's taken us, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes for all of these potatoes, and this is something you might teach your children, if you have children, how to do, because then they'll get used to working in the kitchen. So I'm cutting this in half. Now, you see I've got a pot here. It's kind of a typical large cooking pot. I'm not going to worry about close measurements, but I'm going to fill this pot with water to cover the potatoes. And then I'm going to add some salt. And again, we don't need to be too exacting about the measurements. I'm going to put in a kind of a heaping teaspoon of salt. Now, many people would say to use more than that. I'm going to wait and salt the potatoes when I eat them. And the reason I am is because the potato water, as we call it, the water that the potatoes have been boiled in, is a terrific base for soups. But you don't want it to be too salty, or the soup will be too salty. So these are ready to go on the stove, and we'll readjust here and put them on the stove in a minute. But let's look at the clock just so that you can see how much time has passed, since we're worried about being ready for dinner in time for a 7 o'clock meeting. Okay, we've got the potatoes on the stove here, I'm going to turn it up fairly high to get it started boiling. Now notice that the pot's pretty full of potatoes. It's a lot more than we're going to have for supper. And that makes a different point about the time that's passed. It's taken us some time to peel these potatoes and slice them up and get them ready to boil. And it's going to take some time for them to boil. But we're going to save time in the long run because more than half of these potatoes are going to go in the refrigerator to have for breakfast. So that's why we have so many here. There's probably 3 meals worth for 4 or 5, or 3 or 4 people. So here we go. I got the stove set on medium high. I'll put it even higher so it'll get started boiling. What you want to do is get it started boiling and then turn it down. I'm going to put a lid on it so it saves the heat and it'll boil faster. Now, how much time has passed? Okay, you can see that we've had about 20 minutes go by. I'm going to take half of the potatoes out. And I'm going to just put them in a jar. And I'm going to put them in the refrigerator. And you'll see later what we do with them. But it's going to make the time we've spent be much, much more efficient. Come on out of there. Well, that doesn't want to come. So should have my slotted spoon, but I don't. You'll see the advantage with what I'm doing of saving some jars when you buy things in them. Okay, that's enough. It's all going to fit. It's all that's going to fit. So I'm going to shake these down and then I'm going to put them in the refrigerator. Okay, that's enough. Let's see how our potatoes are doing. I think looking here, they've been cooking for about a little over a half hour, maybe 40 minutes. And really what I'm doing is testing them with this fork and seeing that they're pretty soft, kind of ready to fall apart if I press them. Now what I'm going to do is pour off the water. And I'm pouring them into this mason jar, which will not crack, even though it's getting hot. That's an advantage of a mason jar. You could pour that into a cooking vessel if you don't have a mason jar. So I'm going to pour off most of it. Now this again is not very precise, but this doesn't quite hold it, so I'm going to just use the sink for some. I'm leaving about 1 inch of water in the bottom of the pan. Now I'm going to take my potato masher, and I'm going to mash the potatoes. But I'm also going to add some other ingredients to make it really delicious. You can see the potatoes are kind of fluffy. Some people like their mashed potatoes to be a little better done. That makes them a little watery. Now what I'm going to do here is add some milk. This is a half a cup of milk. You don't have to do this. You could just have more water. Or if you like milk alternatives, you could use almond milk or soy milk or any other milk alternative. But this is making them a little juicier, a little softer. And here what I'm going to do is especially indulgent. I'm going to put in a couple of tablespoons of butter. And one more thing I'm going to add. I'm going to turn it down there a little bit so it doesn't get too hot. Of course, the butter is going to melt fast, and my masher is mixing this all up. Remember, we didn't put too much salt in while it was cooking, so that the potato water here would be usable without being too salty. But most people would like a little more salt in the mashed potatoes, so I'm putting about another half a teaspoon in. You know, salt is really a matter of taste. A lot of you are used to using pretty salty foods because you eat prepared foods or foods in restaurants, and they're very salty. If you like it saltier, you can add a lot more salt than I added. We've kind of gotten used to cooking without too much salt. Okay, I think these things are done, and we're going to sit down and have our dinner. If you can see the clock, you can see that this whole operation has taken 1 hour and 20 minutes, and most of that time we were able to be doing other things. In fact, we have a whole meal on the table that we prepared while these potatoes were cooking. So here I go. Here's the mashed potatoes going into a serving plate. And before I leave you with this evening's segment, I'm going to show you how I like to serve them. So how I like to serve them myself, you know, if we had a big roast beef or something like that, we would have gravy and something extravagant, but we don't eat very much meat. Meat's expensive. Meat is environmentally extravagant, and there are a lot of alternatives. We're having cod with our mashed potatoes tonight, but you might like other things. But to make the potatoes delicious, what I do is put them on the plate like that. I always remember doing this as a child, and I loved it. I make a little indentation there, and I put another dollop of butter, and that's going to melt and be delicious. And I'll also put some salt and pepper on them and be ready to have my dinner. Okay, we'll carry on with this with our breakfast use of the potatoes, but for now we're going to have our dinner. Well, good morning. It's time for breakfast. I'm hungry, even though I'm kind of groggy, but fortunately I have this nice pot of potatoes that I boiled up the other night. I'm going to slice them and have them for breakfast. Okay, well, we've got these sliced up, but I want you to notice something before I go any further. This potato, as you can see, is not a russet. These are actually different potatoes than the ones that I mashed the other day. I sliced those up and had them for breakfast already. So this is a few days later, and what we have here is an organic Yukon Gold potato. The important thing to notice is that it has its skin on. We didn't have to peel these potatoes because they're organic and they have not had pesticides on them the way as we saw the russets do. So there's two advantages to that. One advantage is that they're doesn't take as much time because we didn't have to go through the peeling, but also the peelings have a lot of nutrition in them. I see various controversies about this, but I'm pretty clear that fiber is in the skins, and probably a lot of the nutrition of other sorts in the potatoes is right under the peelings and is maybe peeled off if you do peel them. So these have not been peeled. Well, let's get going with the cooking. So what I'm going to do here, I have a cast iron skillet, and I know that not everyone has these, and they're a little controversial or hard to take care of by some people's opinion. I think they're great if you can get one that's well seasoned and that you've used for a while, but you can use another kind of frying pan or skillet if that's all you have. Now what I'm doing is I'm using olive oil, and the reason I'm using olive oil is because it's a very healthy kind of oil and it's very tasty. And as you can see, I've just kind of poured a dollop of olive oil there to cover the bottom of the pan, and now I'm going to pour most of it off. And this is kind of a trick I use in order to have the potatoes be well browned and evenly browned, but not have absorbed too much oil. So I've poured off most of the oil, but I still have enough to cover the bottom of the pan. And now I'm going to scoop my potatoes in there, and I'm going to arrange them around so that I have good contact with the bottom of the pan. so that one side of them can be nicely browned. Now, my conceit, and I don't know whether you'll agree with me after you've tried this, is that I can have a pretty good imitation of the texture and crispness of French fried potatoes without going to all the bother of French frying, which is very difficult to do. You have to have a lot of oil, and you have to immerse the potatoes in the oil, and it's expensive to use that much oil, but also it's very hard to keep the potatoes from really absorbing a lot of oil. So this is a technique that I use that makes the potatoes crisp and nicely brown, but doesn't take so much oil. So here I've got them all arranged so that they're in contact with the bottom of the pan. Now I'm going to put some pepper on them. Now, salt, as we've said, is much a matter of taste. I'm going to salt them a little bit now, but how much you salt them is very much your own choice. So here they're frying pretty good, but I haven't mentioned this, but the pan is on kind of medium heat, and it's thoroughly warmed up before I start. So there they are, they have pretty good contact with the bottom of the pan. And we'll let them fry a bit. Well, these have been frying for maybe a little over 5 minutes, about 7 minutes, but it's really a matter of checking them out. You see, I'm moving this around to see how they look a little bit, but this is equally important. See, I'm adding a little oil because we had such a little bit there that I'm just going to add a little more and get it all around so that I can be sure that this side of the potatoes have an adequate amount of oil to make them crisp and delicious. Now, I said I was using olive oil. If you don't have olive oil, you could use another vegetable oil. Safflower oil is a good choice. Canola oil has a lot of the properties of olive oil, except that it takes a lot higher heat, but it's got the same advantages in being high in omega-3 fats, which the doctors say are good for us. Now, I'm just going to check these out and see if they're starting to get brown. Yeah, they're starting to get brown, so I'm turning them over now. And I can tell whether I've turned one over because if I haven't turned it over, it has pepper on it. That's what a trick I use to make sure I've got them all turned over. And you can see they're getting nicely brown. And now I'm going to do the same thing because I have the other side of them is now touching the pan, so I'm going to add a little more of this oil. You might wonder why I bothered to put all the oil in and then pour it out. And one reason I did is so the oil would be hot when I put it back in. Also, so there'd be good coverage in the pan. Those are all just tricks you don't need to take too seriously. This is not really a highly delicate operation. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Now I can see some of these must not have been turned over. Well, I guess they're on the edge. Anyway, here we're going. We're going to fry them a little more here. And while it's frying, I'll talk a little about the advantages of these organic potatoes. We admitted that organic costs a little more. We were talking about prices. I checked the prices of the food co-op recently, and the russets were $2.29 a pound, but these were a little less, $1.89 a pound, and that's because of the season. So these Yukon Gold potatoes were not grown in eastern Washington. There's very little organic produce grown in eastern Washington compared to this side of the Cascades. And one reason for that is that a lot of the people who like organic also like it to be relatively local. And you can buy these Yukon Golds, in fact, at the farmers markets. They're grown right here in the Puyallup Valley, and they're grown in Chehalis, one of the big, not big, but one of the important sources at the Tacoma Farmers Markets is an outfit that comes from Chehalis. Well, a few minutes have passed. Let's see how these are browning up pretty nicely. I don't think I need to add any more oil, though I could, but I'm really just kind of stirring the oil around so it's got good contact with everything. As I finish these things up, I want to talk just a little bit about the two tracks that I mentioned earlier. And if I can put it in a sort of succinct way, I think one of the tracks has to do with cost and accessibility. And the other track, which is represented by these organic Yukon Golds, is represented by various advantages that there are to buying organic and using organic produce. And I just want to review those real briefly. We saw that the cost of the potatoes that were grown in the Columbia Basin in eastern Washington was dramatically lower, and that's because the volume is very much lower. I didn't mention this, but one of the reasons besides volume that leads to that lower cost is that there's much less human labor involved. On the side of the organic Yukon Golds that we're cooking this morning, there's a number of advantages that I want to just review. We saw that we didn't have to peel them, and that gave us a little time advantage. The other thing is that they're easily accessible locally. Now, why do you want to care about local agriculture? Well, one of the reasons is that these local farms are smaller, they're a much more human scale. There's a lot of satisfaction in farm work. Not everybody likes it, but there's a lot of satisfaction in seeing things grow. So even though the cost is greater when more people are involved, it provides employment for a lot of people who enjoy that kind of work. We didn't have to peel them because there's no pesticide residue on them, and in fact, pesticides of various sorts are absorbed into the potato, and they're absorbed into lots of non-organic products, a lot of products that use herbicides and pesticides absorb the poisons, and so even if you wash them, that's not going to completely take care of it. An advantage that I think is very important, that's very little discussed, is that farm workers are not exposed to pesticides and herbicides on organic products. So farm workers that are working in these large farms are constantly being inundated with pesticides of various sorts. That's especially true with spraying. So if you care about the health of farm workers, then that's a reason to buy organic. But I don't want to go overboard with this. The reason that I wanted everyone to see our preparation of those russets from eastern Washington was because people have emphasized that the volume that those things produce is a solution to world hunger that local organic produce could never supply. Now that's a very large question, but it seems to me for an individual that it's really a question of what you want to eat, what you want to put into your body. Now these potatoes are really ready to go. You can see how much they are. You try this and I bet you'll see it's a pretty good approximation of French fries, and that's why we've got some ketchup here to put on them, because everybody knows that when you eat French fries you want to have ketchup with them, or at least you have it available. And the other thing is you might want to put a little more salt on them, but that's up to you. Well, here's potatoes. We've had at least 2 meals out of them, so enjoy.